You're listening to Deconstructive Criticism. I am Aaron Flam. We once again welcome ex-Muslim and podcaster Omar Makram to talk about his childhood, youth and anti-Semitism in the Arab world. But first, a big thank you for supporting my work, regardless of if you're supporting it as a Patreon on patreon.com/AaronFlam in one word, via PayPal with Bitcoin, or on Swish 0046 7689433737. 0046 7689433737. My book, This is a Swedish Tiger, is available as an ebook on Kindle or as a paperback on my webpage, aaronflam.com, in both Swedish and English. The book analyzes the relationship between the Swedish Social Democrats and the Socialists and later Islamists in the Palestinian movement and what they have in common, namely an anti-Semitism that can be traced back in an unbroken line to Nazi Germany. Omar Makram apparently did read the Protocols of the Elders of Zion as a young man, so we know that some foreign anti-Semitic ideas have been incorporated into Middle Eastern culture. A few years ago, Mein Kampf was a bestseller across the Arab world. It probably still is, considering Israeli Defense Forces found an earmarked and underlined copy of it on one of the perpetrators of the pogroms on October 7th. Omar Makram came from Egypt to Sweden as a refugee. He fled because of his atheism. When the Swedish migration services didn't believe him, he filmed himself burning a Quran and published the video on YouTube. This was years before Quran burnings were a thing, and no one seems to have taken notice except me. I interviewed him about it, and Omar has since been a guest on the podcast at least 3 or 4 times. Neither one of us can remember exactly which. If you're interested, I suggest you listen to those episodes. Since he came to Sweden, he has worked against honor culture among Swedish migrant youth and broadcasts the podcast The Last Supper, Sista Måltiden in Swedish, together with some friends. In their conversations, he sometimes mentions his background as a fundamentalist Muslim, but never seems to get any follow-up questions from his co-hosts. So I thought I'd ask him more about it. This was the result. Enjoy. Welcome back to Deconstructive Criticism, Omar Makram.
Thank you, Aaron.
So this is the third time you're participating in the podcast.
Is it the third or the fourth? I lost count.
I seem to remember the last time we spoke, it was about postmodernism.
It's possible.
And then before that, it was because you had burned a Quran.
No, there was something in between, I think, about Islamism as well. Wasn't there? Yeah, maybe. I think so.
All right.
Yeah.
So you're telling me we've already covered this subject?
Well, there's always new stuff to cover, I guess.
Yes, sir. This is the 4th attempt at debrief.
Yeah.
So can you just tell me about your upbringing? First, your family. Tell me, where am I? Who are they? What's the climate?
Do you want me to take you down
memory
lane?
Yes.
My memory lane. Yeah. All right, let's see. I was born in Cairo. Well, in another city close to Cairo, but like we were living in Cairo at the time. It's my mother. She was at her mother's when she gave birth to me. I'm the eldest son in the family. I have 3 other siblings. Yeah, it's a typical Sunni.
What did your father do for a living?
He had an import-export company.
That sounds like a spy.
He was a businessman, and my mother, she's a French teacher. They were typical, I would say, maybe upper middle class family, and we had like a really good education. I was sent to private schools, basically, where everything was taught in English. So
but did you live at home, or were they like boarding schools?
No, I lived at home. Although in the beginning, the school ended around 6 p.m. I think, or 6 or 7 p.m. It was like because they helped us also like there with the homework, and it was it's one of the best schools in Cairo at the time. And well, I was raised as a religious Sunni.
What denomination?
Shafi'i. And I'm not so sure how extensive you want me to go, but like
as extensive as you want to
go. And my father, he encouraged me to read a lot, and I was somewhat of a bookworm. I had like almost something which I kind of still have until today, like some kind of knowledge addiction, like data addiction. I want to consume as much data there is out there.
But in the beginning, what type of books did your father want you to read? Like Mein Kampf and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Yeah, those actually, that book I read later on, but it was at my own.
Which one?
Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's one of the popular books in Egypt.
Yes.
It probably still is. Probably it's experiencing a resurgence in sales right now.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
that I read around, I think I was maybe 13, 14. I just like picked it up from a bookstore.
And these schools you went to, was it like mathematics, history?
Yes, everything. Like
Arabic,
English, French, mathematics, history, geography.
Jew hating. No Jew hating.
That is not as much in school, I would say, but it's much more cultural and to some extent, well, religious as well, of course. For me, it was much more about religion, as much of of my software was. It was religious more. Well, there's always an interplay between culture and religion, of course, but for me, I just like, since I believed some things to be the absolute truth from God, this was for me the clearest instructions about what I should believe and behave in life, you know? And this is also, to some extent, explains why when I lost my faith in Islam completely, these instructions were no longer valid. Sometimes I see that some people are a bit, how to say, find it a bit strange that I have changed so radically. But for me, it was just about the instructions. I no longer thought the instructions were valid.
So you're really like an OCD person.
Yes.
And you were given faulty instructions.
Yeah, instructions that I believed were true, which I, at some point, stopped believing they are true.
Tell me about these instructions. What type of person did they make you into?
I would say, like, what would be described by European standards or Western standards as a reactionary person.
How so?
Very reactionary views on women, on sex, on sexuality, on sexual, like, I don't know, homosexuality, for example, about Jews, of course, a lot of antisemitism. It's like you have been given a manual of why you are here, what you're supposed to do, and what you're supposed to avoid in order to reach heaven and to avoid hell. And moreover,
it goes for a lot of religions, though.
Of course. But then if you take it like very much to heart, then it can become problematic here. Because if you are a fundamentalist, that's not necessarily a bad thing if the fundaments of this ideology or religion that you believe in are good or peaceful. Like, if you are a Jain, for example, and you're fundamentalist Jain who believes really too hard that he shouldn't harm anyone or any living soul, it's not necessarily problematic to be a fundamentalist Jain. but it's problematic to be a fundamentalist Muslim, because there's a lot in the fundaments of Islam that is in direct clash with a lot of the values that exist in the West. Most of the values that exist in the West, I would say. And that's not a very strange thing. If you look back in history, Islam has almost always had an anti-Western, anti-European strain, not necessarily just because of the teachings of the religion, but because of the history itself. Like Islam as an expansionary, acquisitive ideology, it basically clashed with the West because it wanted to invade the West. And the Muslims were defeated later, like they conquered under Spain, and like they were defeated in France and so on. And
Al-Andalus.
And this has never really went away. Because also there is a lot in the prophecies of the Prophet and the Hadith and so on that says, for example, that the Muslims will invade the land of Ar-Rum, which is supposedly the Romans, but it's much more interpreted as the Westerners. And since the very beginning of Islam, there were clashes with the Byzantines and so on. So this kind of like anti-Western like grain of or strain in Islam has always been there. It's almost like an identity that is formed in opposition to the Western identity in a sense. They are
like Denmark and Sweden culturally.
That's one way to see it. But the decadent, degenerate West and the righteous Muslims, and this also has contributed a lot to the several Islamic revivals that have happened throughout history, because there is always the desire or the attempt to return back to the fundamentals of Islam as what can be, as what will save the Muslims and what will basically make Muslims great again. If they go back to the religion.
Make Muslims great again. MMGA. I like it.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a redeeming force to return to the fundamentalist Islam.
Exactly. Because for the most part, a lot of Muslims and a lot of like Muslim countries, they see their faith, so to speak, as connected to Allah. This is the path, and a lot of what they have been promised is also connected to how strict or how close they keep to the religion. And this is also how I saw things at the time. So this was my worldview. And in a sense, also it's interesting because considering what's going on right now as well, and whether like in Israel.
Let's talk about that, because I just not finished, but I reviewed your debate with Ali Gorgi.
Debate.
Discussion. I don't know what to call it really.
Tantrum.
Yes, and I've also watched his show with the two Hamasniks who were on and got their view of history. And I've read it before, I mean, the Arab view of this conflict. And it leaves out a few chapters here and there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is what I tried to point out to him also in this debate.
Yeah.
Because it's very convenient. Very convenient, but also it's not very strange. People tend to do that, and groups of people tend to do that, especially if they are engaged in some sort of
conflict,
tribal, religious, holy war. Because this is also what a lot of Muslims see this whole thing as. And it's interesting also to think and to understand that for all of Muslims and Arabs, the holy war is more important than the land. So if you're asking them, for example, to leave parts of what they see as their land, Palestine and so on, they no longer have their holy war. Their holy war is the one that they have to be victorious over the Jews and take over the whole land from the river to the sea. And this, in a sense, it's more important, which is, in a sense, also tragic because it's causing a lot of suffering and misery.
Does it?
Yeah. And it's also heartbreaking that a lot of like people, especially children, who are caught up in this.
But you used to believe all this, right?
I did.
Yes.
And this is why I understand that side as well. And this is why I don't get so provoked when emotionally provoked when I hear how they talk and think, because I used to
think the same.
and talk. And
yes, but what changed your mind on that topic? Because I'm guessing, like, knowing you, sex was probably the first thing that made you abandon devout Islamism.
I guess it could have been a catalyst, but it's not the reason.
No?
I think it's just that how I was so addicted to reading, it started to make me, I think I was like at age 9, I was like subscribing to some like politics and science magazines and things like that. And I started to feel that I know a bit more than the adults around me who are telling me about what and how the world is. And, you know, most religious people, including most Muslims, they take religion out of inheritance, not out of conviction, really. And at some point, I wanted to study Islam very deeply in a way that I will have my own genuine faith.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a bit ironic because I approached this process wanting to strengthen my faith, in a sense, to make it more genuine, you know,
Yes.
that I really study very deeply the Quran, the Hadith, the history of Islam, and so on, and have a very, not original, but very genuine faith that is not like somebody told me, okay, this is how it is, but like, no, that I know how it is. I have analyzed and have reasoned myself to believe in my belief that I inherited. And the problem arose when the more I studied, the more I read, the less it made sense to me, really. And I tried to reconcile it. I tried to reconcile, for example, the Quran and the Hadith, and I couldn't, because there was like so many, in a sense, contradictions. But it's also that, to me, I didn't see the point of the Hadith at some point during this process. This is a process that took around 3 years. So it was a long process. And at some point I decided to leave Sunni Islam and become a Quranist. So relying only on the Quran and what it says. I remember at times when I became a Quranist, we were fasting during Ramadan, and we were at one of our relatives' places having the iftar. And because I'm no longer Sunni, in the Quran it says that you should break your fast only when it's so dark that you cannot differentiate the white thread from the black thread. While Sunni Muslims, they break their fast at the Maghrib prayer, which is still like it's
early.
It's early. It's not that dark yet. And so it's like maybe around half an hour. It's not that much of a difference, but like half an hour, maybe 40 minutes difference or something of the sort. And I remember we were sitting on the iftar table, all the food like laid on the table. Then the adhan comes, the call to prayer, and everybody starts to eat. And then I'm just like not eating. And then my relatives, like, they look at me and I was like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you not eating? Like, didn't you hear the adhan? I was like, yeah, I heard, but Do you know in the Quran it says that you break your fast when it's so dark that you cannot differentiate the white thread from the black thread? They just like looked at me as if I'm like a crazy person. What are you talking about? But it's like I was like, just it is in the Quran. Then haven't you read it? But that's because of the hadith, of course, and the sunnah and so on. So yeah, I started to like reason myself through my belief, so to speak, and adjusting it in a way. So I left Sunni Islam and became a Quranist under a period of time. But then I also, it was still not making much sense to me. I did not really understand the core message of like, which is shared in like Christianity, and I'm not so sure how it is in Judaism, because in Judaism there is no hell, right?
Not really, no.
No. But anyway, so I didn't see the point of like this omnipotent God who could create human beings in whatever form he wants to create them, and is omniscient, so he knows what is going to happen in the future as well. But he creates human beings weak in order to sin, and he gets upset about them sinning, even though he saw this and this is how he created them. And although he's omnibenevolent, he decides to send them to suffer in hell for eternity because of the way he created them and what he has foreseen will happen. So this basic premise did not make rational sense to me. And then there was a lot of things that also it's like more and more when you really try to analyze the text, it sounds more like an angry human being rather than the divine.
Yes.
And this is another thing that also did not appeal to me. And I guess this is all speculation, but I guess also during this period, there's also another thing that is useful when you know another language and you consume intellectual and cultural material that comes from a culture outside of your own, kind of like broadens your horizon a little bit. But also, I would say there is this saying in Egypt and the Arab world that the West will corrupt the youth. And in a sense, this is true, because it kind of like grows on you when you're watching, I don't know, like even things like Friends, for example, and
That
you're
70s show.
Anything, and you're starting to have like, you don't see, it's difficult to not to have sympathy for others as well and other cultures, and you don't see why they need to like burn in hell or why they are the bad guy. What have they done really? And then there's the sex part, I guess. So a lot of factors that contributed to that, and I think also some personality traits apart from the whether OCD or autism or whatever. I don't have like a personality that follows the crowd so much, and I'm not very skittish person in general. I'm not afraid of consequences that much. So leaving a religion, especially like Islam, it's something very big to a lot of people, that the very notion of it is scary enough to make you back off of even approaching this whole like doubt thing, because you would lose your family, your community. You will be pursued maybe by the law in your country. Your life will be in danger. It's like there is a lot of things that basically existential, like many layers of existential threats that you will incur by getting into that territory. And for some reason, maybe I have a malfunctioning survival instinct or something. This does not work for me. So I was not very deterred by this, which makes it easier to like stray away from the.
So we just have to make all the children in the Arab world autistic.
Oh, that's one way to see it.
But how would you reach a man like Ali that you debate or discussed or had a tantrum with?
It's not possible.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. It's not possible to change. I think what has been also difficult here in the West and in Sweden is the complete lack of integration, cultural integration, because of the volumes. What you have done here is to replicate territories that are culturally, geographically in the West, but culturally in the Middle East. And it's very strange if people here would think that the generations who have been born here in Sweden or people who have come here in Sweden would change their mind if they are still living in their same culture. This is what has happened. It could have happened differently, but it would have required very different policies, which unfortunately it's too late for.
So what is to be done now then?
I think one of the things that maybe should be really considered, for example, withdrawing citizenship from people who came here as adults maybe and got their citizenship as adults, who are extremists, who support organizations like Hamas, or this is something I've been wrestling with, and I still am to some extent.
Because you used to be a Quranist.
Yes.
And you stopped believing, and your life is also in danger.
Right.
Yes. And just as mine is because of being Jewish and Swedish.
Right.
And you're a Swedish atheist Muslim, ex-Muslim.
Right.
Which makes you a target as well. So you don't want to particularly share a country, I suppose, with people who you know wants to kill you.
No, there is this aspect, but I mean, there are like considerations when it comes to maybe principles, when it comes to even like consequentialist considerations. What mechanism would you put in place to whether deport people who need to be deported, on what basis, and how can you have a mechanism to revoke citizenship, for example? And what would be the consequences of all that? And how would you actually implement it in practice? And also, when it comes to the idea of citizenship, how problematic is it that Sweden basically had placed zero value in the citizenship of their country, of their nation. And they have given citizenships left and right to people who do not believe in Sweden, who do not believe in the West, who are hostile to the West in many instances, who do not believe in liberal democracy or democracy for that matter, who do not believe in secularism. What is the effect of that on your country and your culture, and by extension, long term, on your laws? This is also something people tend to have a very limited, something which surprises me, a very short-term view of civilization and culture. They think in terms of 2-3 years. This is catastrophic if you are thinking about how to preserve your country and your culture and civilization. You have to think in terms of generations and what kind of society you want and how all these changes will impact it in the future for your children, grandchildren, and their children.
I'm just like, I'm sure you've seen this Pew Research survey that says that Sweden within, was it 30 years or 2050 or something, will be 30% Muslim or something like that. Is it 50%? I don't remember.
I don't remember either, but it's not...
So we could have a countdown clock on my webpage.
Yeah. So, and people don't understand what the impact of that is on the country in the future. Like, what do you think will happen if... This is why I'm also very suspicious of those Salafi life coaches.
Are there Salafi life coaches?
Like Medina Studenten and like
All right, yes.
and these people who try to basically spread Islamic fundamentalism as a way to save the youth in the suburbs
From criminality.
Which first of all does not really, there's no evidence that this thing works at all. Plus it's also very dangerous because if you look at any kind of religious movement, especially puritanical movement, what you're teaching is not necessarily, or like the line that you're drawing is not necessarily the line that your students would want to draw. Take Osama bin Laden, for example. He drew the line at attacking the Saudis. He knew that this is a red line. It should not be trespassed. And this is what he kind of like instructed to his students. This is what he basically wanted to happen, that, don't attack the Saudis. His students deviated from that. And this is why MBS is also have becoming more, have been like clamping down on a lot of like the clerics and so on, because he saw that, okay, they are starting also to attack us. ISIS comes from Al-Qaeda. And it's not like, so these Salafi life coaches, it's not like if they are teaching a more peaceful version of Islam, even if it's like a Salafi version or like a fundamentalist version, but saying that, yeah, we should like only proselytize in peace and like leave things to like the people in charge to deal with and so on. It's not like all of their students will come to the same conclusion. If they come closer and closer to the scriptures in a fundamentalist way, of course, some of them would become jihadis. This is like, it's not rocket science to deduce that.
Because there is a causality between the texts and the practice of jihadism.
Yes. And this is also another thing that a lot of people are not seeing, which is also strange. It can be frustrating sometimes that people don't really want to spend time analyzing and thinking about things that are really beyond the upcoming couple of years, and that's it. So they think, we have a problem with criminality. Well, let's try to turn the suburbs into Salafi zones. Maybe then, if they come closer to God, we will have less crime. And even if you say, well, yeah, but first of all, this has not been proven to work. They're like, yeah, but what do we have to lose? You have everything to lose. You have your future and your country to lose. It can be frustrating at times.
But when you were a fundamentalist, I mean, Quran is extreme because then you don't even trust Mein Kampf.
Right.
But were there like other Western philosophical influences that came into your education? And what Arab intellectual influences came into your education? Also interesting.
Yeah, I think it was more education at school, not so much Western philosophy. We don't really, slightly Plato and Socrates, but there isn't any emphasis placed on them in that sense. A lot of like your philosophy is still derived from religion to a great extent, and from the clerics. And there have been these like more modern clerics who dress like, I remember how appealing this has been for a lot of people in Egypt as well, because we have always been used to clerics and religious preachers, being like, they have like long beards, they are dressed in these traditional clothes and so on. And then more young people who dress in suits, shaved beards, and or like at least not long beards, started to have these talk shows. They've become really popular in Egypt at the time. And we're talking now end of the 90s. Yeah, around end of the 90s, the beginning of like 2000, something like this. This exploded in Egypt. And it had a lot of like emphasis, influence on people, including myself. But But when it comes to West, no, I have to say that most of the Western philosophy, it came afterwards, after I left, rather.
So
not before.
Not a lot of Marxism,
No.
Leninism.
No, Plato is the one that maybe I started to get interested in at some point. When was that? It must be. It was under the same period when I started to examine Islam. I started to maybe look into other not necessarily to try to see which was the right path, but just I got curious about other philosophies, so to speak, but not before that.
No,
not before
and when you hated Israel, then
right?
Yes,
or the Jews, general.
The Jews.
Yes.
And we're talking about the ethnicity Jew, not the delicious juice made of fruit.
Yes.
Yes. So, how did you justify that?
The Jews in Islam are portrayed quite often as the betrayers of God, of Allah. They were supposedly the chosen people, and
we have it on paper.
God, Allah, tried to give them chance after chance, but they were always portrayed as like treacherous, lying, covetous. They always betrayed and killed the prophets that Allah sent to them, things like that. So there is it's like the Jews are the people that God stretched out his hand to, and they spat on it or bit it. And this is the root to the animosity against the Jews in Islam, I would say.
It's not the fact that Abraham owned Hagar as a slave woman, probably raped her, and when she got pregnant with his child, he kicked them out into the desert to die of starvation.
Not at all. Abraham is very holy in Islam.
Okay, really?
Yeah.
Right.
The prophets, because the
So the
Abraham is.
I mean, if you want an original perpetrator of the animosity between the Jews and the Arabs, then a natural suspect would have been Abraham.
Yes. You'd think,
since he had Arab slaves and kicked them out of his home.
You'd think. Well, even though these stories are not really taught in Islam.
So he's a hero.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's holy. He's a holy figure. All in Islam, it's seen as the continuation of Judaism and Christianity. That these three messages were actually sent by Allah, and what happened is that the Jews and the Christians, they have falsified Allah's true message, which included that Muhammad will be the final prophet also, supposedly. Yes. And all these prophets, so to speak, they are very holy in Islam. And this is why sometimes I also, when people deny that the Israelis belong to that area, I tell them, but it is in the Quran, you know that. Who do you think the people of Moses, Solomon, David, because these are holy prophets, and they were the kings of the Israelites in the Quran.
Yeah. And
where were they? Where were they living?
The word Palestinian is not mentioned in the Quran.
No. But if I would steel man their reply, they don't really get that far. But if I how I would have replied then is that yes, I agree, but they have betrayed God and lost their rights because of that. And this would be probably what a lot of people also a lot of Muslims would think if you would come with this argument. But it's also an interesting argument, at least from a semi-secular perspective, because right now there is an interaction between the so-called seculars or the West, basically, who are somewhat friendly towards Islam and the Muslims, and the Muslims have to come up with arguments that are not super religious. So the argument would be, well, they never had the right to this land. They were never there. And you would point out, but even in your book, they were there. And it's a bit difficult if we're having a discussion in a Western context that they would say, yeah, but they betrayed Allah and they lost that right. You know what I mean? But it's interesting to bring up that factoid.
Because when I read this guy, I sent you this article, remember?
Yeah.
It's what's his name? His Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour.
Right.
And he writes a lot about Frantz Fanon, on the wretched of the earth, and I've read about that before from other sources. And also, Leninism, Marxism seeping in through the Soviet support for a lot of Arab terror groups and militias during the Cold War, if nothing else.
Right.
But you noticed nothing of that in your upbringing.
No, not necessarily. The West has just been, even if there was no colonialism, if there was nothing of the sort, the West would have still been the enemy because of the incompatibility in the way of life and beliefs, and also what a lot of fundamentalist Muslims or conservative Muslims see what will happen. There are these, how would you call them in English? Prophecies that things that will happen before Judgment Day, which includes a path to the Muslims basically being at the top of the world. Things includes that also Jesus will come down and he will rule on earth for 40 years. Things of the sort, and the Antichrist coming, and all these things, they are believed by many Muslims. And in that, there is this antagonism between the Muslims and the decadent West. The people who are, because to Muslims, they are the people who are chosen by God, and they will inherit the earth. And this includes a clash with others other forces that exist right now, including the West and the Jews.
I also read this article in German Focus about a German man who works with mostly migrant youth, around 7,000 of them per day, apparently, he has some sort of organization that works with them. And he says that the hatred against Jews in the West is unimaginable. And he doesn't see any possibility of reaching these people.
No, I don't see that either.
So why would you make Sweden your last stand? Obviously, Sweden will be overtaken before many other Western countries, because Sweden is always, ahead of the curve. We're always trendsetters internationally.
That's true. Why? First of all, when I came here, I was not aware that the situation is as it is.
But I told you, the first thing I did.
It was too late. I was here already, Aron. You should have told me before I came. Okay. You're time machine, going back, by the way. Yeah. Go to another country.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's one thing. Another thing, I think it's kind of triggering almost some kind of war mentality in
you.
Me. Yes. That I feel that I don't want to back off. And I see some chance of winning, that we still win. There is a possibility to
Well, it's greater than in Egypt, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. Yes. So here I have there is a better chance to win than in the Middle East, definitely. But that would require a lot of policies that are very radical. And I don't know if the current political parties have the guts and stomach to...
Obviously not.
You don't think... Sometimes I see glimpses of it's... Because here, there is a lot of ideology is one thing. And you can have how to say, fine or refined values and think nicely of people and want to be kind until basically shots start to get fired near your kids. And then it's no longer about...
But shots have been fired around kids here already for years now.
Yeah, but I think it's... This would explain why also a certain party is getting more popular.
Yes.
But it will reach a tipping point when more and more people will say, no, this is enough. We cannot be turning the other cheek all the time.
But then they would have to sacrifice true liberal values.
It's possible that it will come to that.
No, it has to come to that, because we're talking about stemming a demographic explosion of radical Islamists in Sweden within the next 3 decades, right?
Yeah.
So, like pure mathematics stipulate that you have to deport a lot of people.
Yes.
Which in turn means you have to, annul citizenships.
Yeah, but
which is, let's face it, against most legal principles. In that case, but if it's a war, then you have undantagslagar, right? You have exception from normal state of affairs.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, this is what I've been wrestling with. Is there like some kind of fail-safe that should protect liberal democracy? I mean, because how I see it is like that. Sometimes you have your values, your culture, but sometimes you have to step outside of it a little bit in order to actually preserve it.
Yes.
And maybe this is what it will come to. Maybe...
I don't see how it would come to anything else.
Yeah, maybe people will realize, well, maybe we made a mistake to give citizenship to a lot of like Muslim fundamentalists. Maybe this is basically the death of a liberal democracy. And that's not a normative statement. It's a descriptive statement that this is just like what it will lead to. Like if we have a big portion of our citizens who do not believe in liberal democracy, and another portion who are kind of like, I don't know, submissive people who just cower in fear, then you no longer have a liberal democracy. Then you might as well do something to try to protect it.
Well, you saw the pictures from London the other day, right? It's 300,000 people marching, so to speak, quote unquote, for Palestine,
right?
Which is against Israel, as you probably know. And when asked, the London Metropolitan Police just says, well, what do you want us to do? We're outnumbered. And then you see video of some of the police officers, like high officers, who lead the protests.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is also another thing that is worth to talk about. Something I've been thinking about as well, the security risk when it comes to, because more and more of people who do not believe in liberal democracy and have citizenship will come into key positions. Like what happens when you have like a big portion of those people who they are now already to some extent like journalists, but also in the police, in the military,
members of parliament.
Oh, members of parliament.
Jamal El-Haj is a prime example.
Exactly, but imagine like if you have, I don't know, a third of the parliament like that.
Yeah.
At some point.
I can very easily imagine that.
And I don't know, like, how come nobody...
Not because I'm paranoid, it's because Pew statistics tell me that would be reasonable, a third of parliament.
Yeah, I have been before a bit more optimistic because I was optimistic about like the upcoming generations, you know, that maybe there is chance that most of them would change their minds. But the problem with the segregation here, that like I was saying, it becomes a replication of the cultures of the Middle East. They are stuck there.
Yes, well, and our ratio is piss poor compared to the article I read in Focus, the German Focus magazine. He said, 12-year-old came up to me and said, first we will cut the throat of the Jews, then the gays, and then the Christians, in that order. So he knows what he wants to do in life, 12 years old.
I knew also. I wanted to join Hamas during that time also when I was in that age.
Yeah. Because, they are the Harry Styles of the Middle East.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
But also you have a problem here, another problem which...
Is it like joining a band here? It's like, I'm a teenager, maybe we should form a band, or we join Hamas.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think people also... This is why it's a bit useful to have been there, to have lived that. They underestimate the exhilaration of believing that you are in a holy war. It's something that's very uplifting in a sense.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Because, people who are having these experiences, they are not like psychopaths. They are not like crazy people. They just have these certain beliefs that lead them to act and think in the way they do.
Yes.
And this is also why it's a bit dangerous. Because, let's say, if it was only a minority who is like that because of personality traits or whatever, but that's not really the case. It's just like the belief system. But what is like making it even more difficult here? The presence of factions on the left who seem to have this, they are like jihadi commies. They think that they are the new, Castros and Guevaras. They want to have this, like, Kajsa Ekman comes to mind, for example. I'm speculating here, but I imagine in a sense that she's like feeling some sort of exhilaration in a way.
Of course.
To feel that she's like a freedom fighter and she's like trying to stand up like against oppression and things of the sort. And you have, I guess, a lot of people who have these kinds of feelings and
fantasies.
Oh, Greta.
Well, Alexander Bard said, years ago when I interviewed him about the woke left, and he said, well, it's all Rousseau. And I was like, no, but there's a fair share of Marx in here too. And then the 7th of October happened in Israel with the barbarity. And you see, and it's like, you see the left react to that. They fawn over it. They're like, oh, these heroes. And you're like, oh, that's the idea of the noble savage.
Right.
It's a Rousseauian idea.
Right.
And Alexander Bard proves to be right again.
Yeah.
Because there's a fair share of that in the left, the adulation of the noble savage.
Right. Definitely. And it's just like a toxic combination that I'm not so sure. And also another thing of these security risks, people in power, they tend to be often Machiavellian.
Mm-hmm.
And if suddenly you have a big portion of your voter base that are giving you votes who have these ideas, it becomes not even, we're not talking about ideology here, it becomes for your self-interest very difficult to go against them. So if you have a lot of people who are like Muslim or Middle Eastern background who support Palestine, or like they want a less secular society or whatever, they don't like liberal democracy, but they are giving you their votes, it's very difficult to say, well, no, sorry, we only want people who believe in secularism and people who are against Hamas.
But that's why the Social Democrats defend Jamal El-Hajj as a member of parliament tooth and claw, because they know that he delivers votes for them.
Right.
Lots of votes.
Yeah.
And that's the writings on the wall if you're a Jew in this country. I mean, it's obviously, they're not even making the effort to turn the tide. So I mean, they said 10 million in extra money for the Jewish congregations for security. I mean, that protects you against terror, but it doesn't make the country at large livable if you know that there's a fair share of your compatriots who'd rather see you dead.
Right.
And there's no doubt that that's what's going on. I don't know if you saw the pictures from the latest demonstration in Stockholm outside of Parliament. It was like 3,000 people, and they're shouting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free."
Right.
And how will we achieve that? Well, intifada, intifada. And I mean, I've seen pro-Palestinians and Arabs defend that by saying, well, intifada, it just means shaking off. It's just like a hair musical type insight where you just shake off the old regime. But I mean, I've seen pictures of intifada. They always look like violent uprisings.
They are.
Stone throwings and burning tires and sometimes gunfire. So for me, when I hear from the river to the sea and how that will be achieved is by intifada, then I know what they're saying. They're saying they want to kill me.
Yeah. Yeah, it is indeed a sorry state of affairs. But what do you think should happen then?
What I think will happen is, I think Sweden, as it stands now, is pretty much lost. But it seems to me that, for instance, in France, I saw that Marine Le Pen's party had joined the pro-Israel rally, and the left had been shut out. So maybe France has reached that tipping point you were talking about. And I see, for instance, Douglas Murray in England call for deportation of Hamas sympathizers, which would indicate, well, he's a front runner, I think, but it would indicate at least that sentiment is alive and well in England.
I think it's probably alive here in Sweden. There are some, like I think Sverigedemokraterna, they have been talking about like whether revoking citizenship or deporting people. Moderaterna are starting to like approach that territory as well. They have talked about...
Kristdemokraterna floated that balloon just 2 days ago. Ebba Busch wrote a debate article.
Right. Yeah. So I think actually we're moving there, but the problem is, how I see it is that how will it go in practice? You know, we're not even like succeeding to deport people who are classed by SAPO as like violent extremists and high security risks. Because, yeah, I don't know.
That is the question. It is not like Hamlet says, whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. But if the Swedish social services and so on can actually start kidnapping Muslim children and deport them.
Well, I think this is a bit... it's a dark thought, and I take no pleasure in it. But unfortunately, I don't think there will be, knowing human nature, I don't think there will be a sufficient push in that direction, except after a couple of terrorist attacks, which are a question of when, not if.
Yes.
It will happen. And a lot of the changes, the radical changes that come to society are the product of fear quite often. Fear is a great motivator to try to save yourself. Because if you're not afraid, you will not try to save yourself because you're not afraid. So I think this is what it will take, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right. Bleak though it is. So thank you for coming to Deconstructive Criticism, Omar Makram.
Always a pleasure, Aaron.
Thank you for listening to Deconstructive Criticism. This episode's guest was Omar Makram. I hope you found it enlightening. We will explore this subject with other voices too later on. You can find Omar on Twitter/X and in the podcast Sista Måltiden/The Last Supper, which is in Swedish, although Omar speaks English to the others. Thank you for supporting my work, regardless of if you're supporting it as a Patreon on patreon.com/AaronFlam, Aaron Flam in one word, via PayPal with Bitcoin, or on Swish 0046-768-943737, 0046-768-943737. My book, This is a Swedish Tiger, is available as an ebook on Kindle or as a paperback on my webpage, aaronflam.com, in both Swedish and English. The book analyzes the relationship between the Swedish Social Democrats and the Socialists, and later Islamists, in the Palestinian movement and what they have in common, namely an anti-Semitism that can be traced back in an unbroken line to Nazi Germany. I am Aaron Flam. Until next, have a good unit of time.